Morning, everyone, and welcome to Word on Wednesday. I'm going to do something completely different today. I'm not going to be in my role as worship leader or talk about music or a song. I'm going to go back to my professional roots, which is as a clinical dietitian and clinical teacher. So when I first started working at Groote Schuur Hospital, I had projects in various different departments, and one of them was in obstetrics and gynae. And we one day had a talk from a Hebrew language scholar called Azila Talit Reisenberger, who's still at UCT as a Hebrew language scholar. And she was investigating for her PhD, I think, concepts of birthing in Hebrew language Bible literature, biblical literature. And she came and gave us a talk, and she was raising the question about why Jacob and Esau were so different, even though they're twins. And that's when I first met our own real life Jacob and Esau in the neonatal nursery at Groote Schuur. So I'm going to be talking about that today. And I've called this talk The Other Miracle Birth. So I've got a few graphics. I'm going to just share my screen with you so that you can see some graphics. So I've called the talk The Other Miracle Birth. And I'm going to read a short passage from Genesis 25, which I'm going to show you on the screen, and I'm actually reading a slightly different translation of that, but you can follow. I actually do want you to see the one and hear the other. So I'm reading from the Message. God answered his prayer and Rebecca became pregnant. But the children tumbled and kicked inside her so much that she said, "If this is the way it's going to be, why go on living?" In your version on the screen, which is the NIV, it says she went to inquire of the Lord, but the Message translates it like this: she went to God to find out what was going on. Isn't that such a lovely way to interpret this? It sounds so much like a woman. She went to God to find out what was going on. She went to the source to get to the bottom of things. God told her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 peoples butting heads while still in your body. One people will overpower the other, and the older will serve the younger. When her time to give birth came, sure enough, there were twins in her womb. The first came out reddish, as if snugly wrapped in a hairy blanket. They named him Esau. His brother followed, his fist clutched tight to Esau's heel. They named him Jacob. The boys grew up. Esau became an expert hunter, an outdoorsman. Jacob was a quiet man, preferring life indoors among the tents. Isaac loved Esau because he loved his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Twins are so fascinating. I think humans have always been fascinated by the idea of twins, that 2 people start off as one unit, one union, and then diverge. So Jacob and Esau in many ways are sort of an echo of the split in all of us, the rough and the smooth, the wild and the tame, the sly and the impulsive, the manipulator, and the one who cannot delay gratification, the macho and the meek. Now, a lot of Bible commentary I've noticed discusses Jacob and Esau as fraternal twins because they are so physically different from each other and also very different in their character and their apparent motivations as they grow up or as they become adults. But the text from the Bible actually makes it very clear from a clinical point of view that these are identical twins, and there is a medical explanation for their profound differences at birth and also later in life. So twins can occur in one of two ways. You either have two-egg twins who are essentially two different siblings in one pregnancy. They can either be of the same sex or they can be of different sexes. The second way to get twins is one-egg twins, where you have a division of a single fertilized egg into two same-sex babies who are effectively genetically identical to each other. Now, apart from the ways in which the two types of twins can occur, there are also different ways in which the placentas can develop and the membranes and the amniotic sacs can develop. So for two-egg twins, there are two ways. You either can have one twin each in his own or her own amniotic sac and her own placenta. So there are two entirely self-sufficient little life support systems developing in the same womb. The second way is that you can have twins each with their own amniotic sacs, but with placentas that fuse together. So it's two separate placentas which may fuse. Now, one-egg twins have four different ways in which the placenta and the membranes can develop. If the one egg that is fertilized splits very early after the embryo has formed, these twins can also develop in exactly the same way as two-egg twins, each with their own placenta and own amniotic sac. But if there is any delay in the splitting of the fertilized egg, they can develop into two separate amniotic sacs, but with one single shared placenta. And if they split off even later, more than 8 or 9 or 10 days after fertilization, they will develop together in one shared amniotic sac with one big shared placenta. Now, this is the kind of twin development that Jacob and Esau had, this kind, where they shared one amniotic sac and one placenta. So it's a very rare development pattern or placentation pattern. And we know that they are this type of twin because it says in the text of the Bible. It tells us that when they were born, Jacob was clinging on to the ankle or the foot of Esau. And the only way that the one twin could have been holding on to the limb of the other twin if they were sharing one amniotic sac. So this type of pregnancy where the twins share both a placenta and one amniotic sac is actually a fairly high-risk pregnancy. There is about a 50% relative mortality risk from this kind of placentation and amniotic sac development. And this is where the trouble starts, where we split from the union that we once were. It is hazardous birthing nations. So the risks of being inside the same amniotic sac include entanglement of the cords. So you can see from this picture that it is possible that when the babies move, their cords can become braided and knotted into each other, sometimes into very complex sort of monkey hand knots that entangle within each other, and that can be dangerous for both of the twins. You can get intrauterine growth retardation, you can get fetal anomalies in one or both of the twins, and they are at high risk for premature birth. Now, the text also tells us that they were battling inside the womb. This was Rebecca's complaint, that they were fighting each other. So I'm going to show you a little video. There you go. What you're seeing in this video is a twin pregnancy, and this in fact is a Jacob and Esau twin pregnancy. So what you're seeing is this twin who every now and again pushes his knees forward and butts forward with his body, and this twin who's kicking with his legs all the time. See, this one's pushing with his knees, this one kicks with his legs, pushes with his feet all the time. So they are fighting each other, and twins are known to do this, to smack each other and box inside the womb. But the other thing that you can probably notice quite clearly on this video is that the one twin, this twin, is much larger and appears to be less active. This is a more sleepy twin. And this one is little, and it's squished here into the corner of the uterus like that. It looks so much smaller than the other one, and that's because it is. And this is the typical scenario of what is now recognized to be called twin-twin transfusion syndrome. It is a known complication. About maybe 10 to 15% of pregnancies where the twins share one placenta can develop this syndrome, and it's unusual, but it is actually quite hazardous. It is associated with high risk, and the way it happens is that the shared placenta can develop abnormal blood vessel connections with each other's blood flow. So they will intermingle their different blood systems, but in an unequal way. So these abnormal vascular connections allow the blood to be unequally shared between the two twins. So you get this typical scenario of the one twin, which is the Jacob twin, also called the donor twin. And this donor twin, through these abnormal blood connections, transfuses the recipient twin, the Esau twin, with extra blood, with extra oxygen, and with extra nutrients. So as a result, the Esau twin grows much larger, up to 20% larger, and the Jacob twin can have significant intrauterine growth restriction. So there is a discordant growth pattern between the two twins. And here is a photo of the twins, two twins being born. Can you actually see with my face there? Let me move that out the way. This is an actual Jacob and Esau twin birth, and you can see how the Jacob baby is the donor baby is much, much smaller because it's been deprived in the womb of oxygen and nutrients, and therefore has been restricted in its growth, while the other twin has gotten a lot bigger. So isn't this just a snapshot of the whole of humanity in one womb? When you share your food unequally, things go wrong. Things can go wrong. Now, this is not just about one baby getting bigger and one baby being small. This is actually a very dangerous situation. There is a high risk that both or one of the babies can die in utero slowly or sometimes more quickly. So the risks in the donor baby, the Jacob baby, are that the baby gets dehydrated and as a result often develops kidney failure, brain injury from not getting enough oxygen, and can die. Whereas the Esau baby, the recipient baby, risks being hugely fluid overloaded because they are transfused all the time, extra volume. And therefore they can get high blood pressure, and the developing fetal heart struggles to cope with the extra volume, so they can get heart failure. These babies, the second twin, the recipient twin, can also get a form of brain injury, and they both have the risk of dying. So when you have discordant sharing of nutrition, you slowly kill each other. It's just for different reasons. I can't hurt you without hurting myself. Both too little and too much is problematic. Now, when the one twin dies, this will often very quickly lead to the death of the second twin. So, for example, if the bigger, the recipient twin dies of heart failure, they will often hemorrhage into the second twin, which kills that twin as well. Now, these types of pregnancies, by the way, are also associated with increased maternal risk. It's not only the babies that are at risk, but also the mother. So again, it's when we can't share, we hurt each other, but we also hurt the one who made us. So why is it that Esau came out so red? So this is a form of twin-twin transfusion syndrome called twin anemia polycythemia sequence, which is a sort of a subtype of twin-to-twin transfusion abnormalities. And here you can see this again is Esau and Jacob just after they are born. So the Esau twin is what's called polycythemic. They have an excess of red blood cells. So they have an extremely high hemoglobin, and these extra red blood cells make the blood very thick and viscous, and they can sludge in the cerebral vessels, and they can also have an excessive red blood cell turnover, which releases high amounts of bilirubin. And those two things together cause neurocognitive impairment. So this could explain why, as we see in the biblical text, Esau is depicted as being less intellectual in adulthood than Jacob, and why Jacob is so capable of tricking him so easily out of something so important as his birthright. And it might also explain why he's got poor impulse control and is more aggressive and more volatile in adulthood. The Jacob twin, on the other hand, the donor twin, has a lower hemoglobin, is an anemic, pale baby. And because it has a low hemoglobin, can also develop heart failure. I'll just move that out of the way again. Can also develop heart failure. Now, this is a very challenging situation. If I were a neonatal dietitian working in a neonatal unit, and I had a patient who was a baby like this with anemia and with significant intrauterine growth restriction, I would certainly use supplemental nutrition. I would use artificial nutrition support, and I would use enrichment, fortification, in order to achieve appropriate catch-up growth, so that this underweight baby can catch up to his normal growth parameters. Now, Rebecca obviously didn't have that scenario. She had twins, and all she could do was breastfeed. So in order to catch up, the growth that would have been required would have been very challenging for her. Now, I said earlier in the talk that these twin transfusion abnormalities do predict or are associated with premature delivery. So it is very likely that these babies were also born premature. So she's now got 2 premature, 1 very underweight, 2 quite sick babies that she is trying to raise. And this might also explain why Jacob is depicted as more of a mommy's boy, maybe hanging around the tent, being with his mom all the time, because he probably required a great deal of attention as a newborn, being as weak as he would have been. Now, in modern obstetrics, what would happen today with a pregnancy as high risk as this is this pregnancy would be followed from very early on at a specialist fetal medicine center. And 2 things would have been done. Number 1, you would try to stop the twins from transfusing each other. And that's done with laser coagulation, where you disrupt these abnormal vascular connections between the 2 twins to try and prevent or manage these abnormal sequences between the 2 of them. And the second thing that you would do is deliver the babies early by cesarean section, because the earlier you deliver them, the less organ damage they have, so they have a higher chance of survival. So without those interventions that obviously would not have been available to Rebecca and her midwife, the mortality would have been more than 80%. 80 to 100% would be the usual mortality expected from a high-risk pregnancy like this without any intervention. So since they both survived the pregnancy, it's very likely that they naturally came as premature babies. So this really is a true miracle birth, as described in the Bible. Now, just as a sort of side note, what's interesting about the rest of Genesis is that it's sort of a textbook of midwifery. It talks about how to do herbal-based fertility treatments. It talks about how to deliver a breech baby. Benjamin was almost certainly a breech delivery, the way it's described in the Bible. And then the other twins in Genesis, Tamar's babies, were also a very, very high risk labor. But that's a story for another day. Let me stop sharing. Let me leave it there. I think I've gone on long enough. I hope I've given you something to reflect on. Keep warm, be safe, and I'll see you next Wednesday.